So the last video where I used the word busted was about 5 months ago. I don't use the term broken or busted very often, but with the changes made this season, I really do think this build is kind of busted. That's because we now have access to 4 strong verbs all at the same time. We can also have these up infinitely, which is even crazier, and that's just by landing 2 hits with our weapon. Yeah, that's right, just hits, not even kills. Then we get to stack the Prismatic Hunter Subclass on top, since mostly all of it comes from our exotics alone, and it just gets crazier the more you add it up. The gameplay you're watching is all from wave 35 or higher in the Expert Onslaught, so we're at least 30 power under or more here, and I want you guys to take notice of our healing even without devour, and that healing comes from 4 different sources. We basically have infinite void overshields, which now gives 70% damage reduction, and it increased HP to 150, which means they are very, very tanky overshields now. Then we get the blind debuff, which just takes groups of enemies out of the fight, and also the jolt debuff that adds a ton of overall damage. Those 2 verbs are some of the strongest in the entire game. They're just not used as often because they're normally only found on the arc subclasses, and of course those subclasses struggle with healing. Now the best part about all of this is that those void overshields, blind, are all on a 3-second cooldown. All you have to do is hit an enemy twice. So you're on a beefier target, hit them twice with your weapon. Or you have to kill 1 single enemy. And every 3 seconds, we have some of the best crowd control through blind and survivability with the void overshields, while still not adding in the overall subclass build, like the stasis shurikens or gunpowder gamble for example. I think you get where I'm going with this. All of this is made possible by the massive buffs that the Dearest received. The direct hit damage was increased by 33%. That means it holds its own against stronger targets now and does a lot more damage. They reduced the camera recoil, so quality of life, plus 5 reserve ammo, so now with 1 reserve mod, you're holding 40 shots in this thing, and it now spawns a moth on 2 direct hits. But that's gonna actually spawn 2 moths, 1 arc moth and 1 void moth, thanks to our exotic armor piece we're gonna use. And then they reduced the moth cooldown to 3 seconds, and that's shared with the on-kill trigger. So you either land those 2 hits to create the 2 moths, or you kill 1 enemy to create the 2 moths, and this can happen every 3 seconds. They increased the projectile velocity and reduced the projectile gravity, so just overall made the weapon feel so much better and way stronger with the damage buff. Now 1 void moth that spawns from this will give you half a void overshield. So all you need to do is create 2 moths, which is going to take you 6 seconds, right? You will have a full void overshield coming to you. And when you're with the team, those void moths can actually go to your teammates and help them survive as well. And then of course you're going to create the arc moth. That arc moth, when it explodes, it literally does like 30k damage, so just as much as any normal grenade, and it has pretty good AoE. So now you basically have an ability that does the damage of a grenade in a good AoE that's happening every 3 seconds. And that arc moth will use the blind debuff and blind everything that it goes off and hits in that AoE explosion, so it can blind groups of enemies and also even blind like an unstoppable champion. And then to pair with that, we add the fragment facet of dominance. Your void grenades weaken targets and your arc grenades jolt targets. So now the 2 moth charges that we have from our grenade ability that's on a 38-second cooldown will still blind everything, but now it adds the jolt debuff to groups of enemies. That just makes the ad clear that much better for your 2 grenades. That's pretty crazy when you think about just that interaction alone. Now we pair this with the exotic Mothkeeper's Wraps. This is the exotic that turns your grenade into that cage of loyal moths that release on impact and fly towards the nearest target or ally. You get 2 grenade charges with this, so you actually have 2 throws, which is great. It has its own cooldown, so basically at 100 resilience, it's about 38-second cooldown for 1 grenade, which is very good. I think that's the shortest cooldown for a grenade in the entire game. And again, those arc moths, when you throw them, will still blind and jolt because of what we just went over. Now, if you're far away and you throw it, it'll create 2 arc moths. If you're close enough to it, it'll create 1 arc moth and 1 void moth, just like our weapon. So if you throw it at your feet, roll away, dodge, and run out of there, there will be a void moth chasing you and you'll end up getting that overshield. It's how I survive a lot of times. It's like an oh panic button, right? And you just throw it at your feet and there's that instant void overshield. And then another thing about the Mothkeeper's Wraps here is that's what allows 2 moths to be created by the weapon Dearest. If you took these off, you'd only be creating 1. So overall, just the interaction with the weapon alone adds so much and makes these things S tier with this combo. Now, as you can see in the gameplay, we are surviving a ton. Well, we already went over the void overshields you're getting from those void moths. We take the super Silence and Squall, the stasis super, and we pair that with Facet of Purpose. So every time we pick up an Orb of Power, we get Frost Armor. This can stack up to 5 times, so you have that 70% damage reduction from void overshields, and roughly a 25% damage reduction from the Frost Armor. We add in 2 Withering Blades, the stasis shurikens, for a great way to help build our darkness energy, and 2 of those shurikens bouncing in groups groups of enemies can almost fill our dark bar alone. And then of course Gambler's Dodge, so when we dodge near an enemy, we'll get that shuriken back. For the first fragment, I took Winter Shroud. This actually could be exchanged for Stylus Executioner if you really want, if you want more survivability, but I honestly didn't even need that, and I'd rather have my dodge up more often. And when I dodge near an enemy, it slows targets, right? So it was just another way to apply the slow debuff and crowd control enemies. And then every time I slowed with my dodge or my shurikens, I was getting a lot of my dodge ability back very quickly, so I could have my dodge up as often as possible. And then I do like to take Gunpowder Gamble with this. Basically, one stasis shuriken you throw out will charge your Gunpowder Gamble. And Gunpowder Gamble is on a 6-second cooldown. And Gunpowder Gamble is also coded as a grenade, just like our moths. So everything we do with a grenade that interacts with grenades will work with Gunpowder Gamble. And since it's on a 6-second cooldown, we're just chucking it out left and right. And our moths will help us get this Gunpowder Gamble. Now, speaking of grenades, we'll add to that survivability and put on Facet of Mending as a fragment. Grenade Final Blows cure you, and your Transcendence Grenade Final Blows increase the strength of this effect. So now our 2 Moth Grenades from Mothkeeper's Wrap can cure us. Our Gunpowder Gamble can cure us when we throw that out. And then we take Recuperation on our legs. We pick up an Orb of Power, we'll get 70 HP. So a 4th way to just get healing from the build. And then if you do go into your Prismatic form, which you're going to have up often and you should be using, Hellfire Spike again will cure you when it gets kills. And that was buffed for the tracking and aim assist, so it's a lot easier to stick on enemies. I like Facet of Ruin for the increased solar ignition area for our Gunpowder Gamble, also for the increased solar ignitions coming from Hellfire Spike, and then increased shattered damage coming from our Withering Blades when we're freezing stuff, coming from our Silence and Squall when we're freezing stuff, and coming from our Hellfire Spike when we're freezing things. We'll add in Facet of Protection, again 15% damage reduction all the time when you're near enemies, and that goes up to 25% when you're in your Prismatic form. So you have Facet of Protection, Frost Armor, and Void Overshields all adding to damage reduction, while you have the Moth Grenades healing you, the Gunpowder Gamble healing you, the Transcendence Grenade healing you, and Orbs of Power healing you. And then lastly, we'll take Facet of Dawn. Since we do have our melees up all the time, our shurikens, every time we use those, we'll get that 6-second Radiant buff, which just allows XDers to hit 25% harder. When you get that going on a boss, hitting 25% harder and the 33% damage buff that it got this season, it's hitting pretty hard. Now for the mods on the build, it's built for orb generation and keeping special ammo up in Xderis. So basically 2 firepower mods. So every 5 seconds, a grenade can create an orb of power. This includes our Gunpowder Gamble, our moths, and you're gonna be throwing one every 5 seconds. You'll take a special ammo finder, an arc reserves, and an arc scavenger to make sure you keep ammo up in that special weapon. And then on the class item, we take special finisher. Every time we get 3 stacks of armor charge by picking up orbs of power and you finish an enemy, you'll create a special brick for you and your fire team. I've talked enough in this video, so you can click the Mobilytics link down below and you'll see all the mods that I use. Just hover over them, they'll give you the name and where exactly you slot them. And nothing from the artifact really benefits this. The only thing I was getting was trace evidence. Rapid final blows on targets affected by Jolt or Blind. We're creating an Ionic Trace here and there. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys give this build a try because you're gonna have a blast. I'll see you guys all in the next video. Have a great rest of your day.